Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
So far, so good, John. How about you?
I'm doing good, thanks. So today we're going to talk about a number of items, starting with the fallout from the special counsel investigation into Joe Biden's mishandling of classified documents. Robert Hur, who led the investigation, recommended no criminal charges, which means that Biden is basically getting the same legal pass that Hillary Clinton, Mike Pence, and even really Donald Trump got. There's been some confusion over this, but Trump was never actually charged with mishandling documents. He was charged over refusing to give them back and obstructing attempts by the federal government to get them back. But anyway, the bigger news coming out of the report was that Hur cited numerous examples of Biden being confused and not remembering significant things. Bernie, this would seem to play into an already well-established narrative, doesn't it?
Exactly. The Hur report, when they talked about Biden's memory and memory lapses and all that, all it did was tell the American people what we already knew. I mean, Joe Biden may deny reality by saying he's got no memory problems, but he does. And you don't need to have a medical degree from Harvard or any place else to know that he does. We know what we see. We see him shuffling along. We see him stumbling when he speaks. So Democrats are furious with Robert Hur, but if they want to be angry at anybody, it's the American people who they should be angry at. A brand new poll by ABC News just out a few days ago says that this is incredible, 86% of the American people think Joe Biden is too old to serve another term. And that includes 91% of independents and a vast majority of Democrats. I mean, he's going to stay in based on everything he said. But when you deny reality, and I'll give you a few examples, it never turns out well. Nixon said, "I'm not a crook," okay? Clinton said, "I never had sexual relations with that woman." Gerald Ford said during a debate that the Soviet Union doesn't control Eastern Europe. They were all denying reality. And you know what? The other party won after each of those statements. And now Joe Biden is saying at that angry news conference the other night, he's saying, I don't have any memory problems. What are you talking about? Well, he's denying reality, and denying reality is not a good thing for the person saying it or the party he represents.
No, I agree. And there's definitely, there's been some pushback from the left on what Robert Hur said. Some are calling his commentary a cheap shot and pointing out there's the whataboutism, of course, the various examples of Donald Trump's mental gaffes and confusion. And I think there are arguments to be made there on both accounts, perhaps. But when you compare, one thing on the comparison between Biden and Trump, I think it's going to hurt. Biden there is a noticeable difference. Trump is vibrant still, and Biden has sort of that deer in the headlights thing going on. There are these mental lags there that you just can't ignore. And when you combine, this with Biden refusing to do the Super Bowl interview, second year in a row, and it was recently announced the White House too. He has a regular physical coming up, and he's refusing to take a cognitive test along with that physical. It's one thing to answer, Donald Trump's call to do that, but when it's part of your annual thing and you're foregoing it, that all seems very concerning. And it's not like it's people aren't noticing it, like you said. This is in front of us all the time.
Well, I'll tell you who else is noticing it besides the American people. A subgroup of the American people. Democrats are noticing it. They're not saying it publicly. Most of them, the overwhelming number of them, aren't saying it publicly, but privately, they're worried. They know they've got a problem on their hands. Now, the question is, will Biden either drop out before the convention or at the convention release his delegates? I don't think so. Not hearing what he's been saying about how wonderful he's doing. But if he does, the question is, will that person, whether it's Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, or anybody else, will that person do better against Donald Trump? I think the answer is yes. I think Donald Trump's best shot is against Joe Biden. The American people are going to have to make a decision in November if it's Biden versus Trump. They're both unfit for office as far as I'm concerned, and I think as far as you're concerned, but for different reasons. They may say, look, I don't like Donald Trump's nastiness, his demeanor, his incivility, but I don't want Joe Biden, who just can't remember the president, confuses the president of Mexico with the president of Egypt, and says he talked to the wrong person who runs Germany and Germany and another country. What was the other country? Oh, France. Germany and France.
Okay.
And the leaders he said he talked to have been dead for a long time. And then at his news conference to show how great his memory is, he couldn't remember the name Hamas. He said Israel is fighting an opposition, an unnamed opposition. No, he's not. They're not fighting just an opposition. They're fighting Hamas, and a reporter had to remind him of that. So when voters have to make a decision, I mean, I'm going to invoke for the 100th time Henry Kissinger's line about when asked what he thought of the Iraq-Iran war. He said, it's a pity they both can't lose. That's how I feel about Trump versus Biden. It's a pity they both can't lose, but one of them's going to win. And I suspect it's going to be Donald Trump, because Joe Biden is clearly, this is not a political statement, he's clearly unable to carry out the duties of the president for 4 more years. And one more thing, John, if he drops out or if he's incapable of serving 4 years, if he wins election, who's the next president? Kamala Harris. And I think voters are going to take that into consideration when they vote also.
What's interesting is that, unsurprisingly, because it's politically smart, the Donald Trump campaign is highlighting all of these, instances, in their ads, online ads mainly at this point, of Biden forgetting these things. Biden's campaign is doing the same thing with Trump, showing these where he's in speeches and he's talking about President Obama, who's in office right now, and
they're both right, and they're both right.
Getting the Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley mixed up, and I'm like, yeah, they're both right. And it is this back and forth thing, just a reminder of how god awful these choices are. And either side, if they were to switch it up, would win in a landslide against the other person if the other side doesn't switch it up.
Exactly. Yeah. Now you mentioned briefly that he didn't do the Super Bowl interview. That's part of a bigger strategy, as I'm sure you know. They're going to keep him in a cocoon like they kept him in a basement in 2020. He ran the campaign from his basement in Delaware. Now it's going to be no Super Bowl interview, as we know. Going to be as few off the cuff remarks as possible. As few campaign rallies without a teleprompter as possible. They're going to hope he wins. I mean, they don't have his handlers don't have a choice if he's not going to drop out. So they got to figure out a way to help him win, and it's going to be to keep him as much away from opening his mouth without a script as possible. And I suspect even with a script, he's going to be doing this. He's going to say, the reason I feel this way, and he's going to be holding a piece of paper and he's going to read right off of showing how personal his views are, which was those views written by a handler. So the cocoon strategy is what they're going to employ. I'm sure of that, but I don't think it's going to work.
No, and I think one of the reasons it did work last time, they had the pandemic going on. It made sense that he would be from his house. They had that excuse, obviously. So let's shift up a little bit and talk about Congress. There was a lot of congressional drama last week. I wrote about the bipartisan border bill going down in flames. People can check out that column here on this website. There was also the standalone funding bill for Israel that collapsed. And also there was a failed attempt to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. A handful of Republicans killed it, that attempt, including my former congressman, Ken Buck, and also Mike Gallagher, I believe he's from Wisconsin. He has since announced that he'll be retiring from Congress. It was a pretty embarrassing situation for House Speaker Mike Johnson, but Bernie, was there ever, in your view, a serious case for actually impeaching Mayorkas? Did that make sense?
I want to be very clear about what I'm going to say, and I want the people listening to us to stay with me to hear the conclusion of my remarks. I think Mayorkas is guilty of malfeasance in office. I think he's guilty of not protecting the border. I think he's guilty of being a team player and going along with what the White House wants, even if it's not in the best interest of the American people to have an open border. And the reason Democrats want an open border, it's a cynical reason. They talk about a path to citizenship, which means at some point, these illegal immigrants, millions of them, will be able to vote. And who are they going to vote for? The Democrats figure they'll vote for Democrats. So I think he's guilty of being incompetent generally, okay? I want to make that very clear. That said, I don't think any of the things I mentioned amount to a high crime or misdemeanor. And that's what the Constitution is about when it comes to impeaching somebody. It's a high crime or misdemeanor. Malfeasance in office is bad. I think he should be removed from office, but not via the route of impeachment. And if Republicans succeed, and they may succeed in a few days or by the, next week or whatever, because they're going to have another vote. And if they succeed at impeaching him, you know what's going to happen, and we all know what's going to happen. The Democrats are going to impeach some other cabinet minister when Republicans have the presidency. It's going to be this back and forth ping-ponging BS that all of us should be tired of. So in conclusion, I want to make very clear, I think Mayorkas is doing a terrible job. I think he's doing a terrible job because he's been given orders to do a terrible job because they want an open border, Democrats. But I don't think it rises to the level of high crimes or misdemeanors. I don't know what you think, John.
No, I'm pretty much there too. People here that are familiar with, what I wrote during Trump's impeachment. I'm not opposed to using impeachment when it's warranted, but like you said, impeachment, it's supposed to be about an abuse of power, not someone being bad at their job.
Right.
Even in the wording of the articles of impeachment, the case for abuse of power wasn't really even made. It was more of a negligence argument. So I agree with you. I mean, this guy has been ineffective, but now that, and it's what's interesting too. I don't know if you noticed, there hasn't been much talk on impeaching Joe Biden lately. That was sort of a hot topic for a while, and I don't know if the Republicans are seeing that he's sort of imploding on his own. They're not gonna. I don't know. I have you noticed that?
I'll tell you this: if they try to impeach Joe Biden, who's also doing a bad job in office, that will hurt the Republicans far, far more than it will hurt Joe Biden, because people will see it as a political move, and I think the partisans will like it. But most Americans have had enough of this crap. They've just had enough. And you don't impeach a president because he's doing a bad job. You don't even impeach him because he's incompetent. You impeach him if he's committing a high crime or misdemeanor, if he's taking bribes, if he's working for a foreign government and taking money from a foreign, if he's a traitor, those are high crimes and misdemeanors. Being a bad president, being incompetent, not knowing what city you're in when you make a speech, those are grounds for removal, but not by impeachment. Those are grounds for removal by his own party, by Democrats saying, Mr. President, it's time to go, but not by impeachment. That will hurt the Republicans. That I guarantee you that will hurt the Republicans, because the American people will notice what it's all about. Don't do it, Republicans. Don't do it. If you want to win, don't impeach Joe Biden.
And it's possible they've come to realize that at this point too, exactly what you're saying. But I guess we'll see. I wouldn't put it past anyone not to do the dumb thing, because that's what goes on in politics all the time anymore. So let's switch to another topic. Last week, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments to decide the fate of Colorado's decision to remove Donald Trump from the November ballot. Colorado has cited Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. To be clear, there hasn't been a ruling yet, at least not as of the time we're recording this, but several statements made by both liberal and conservative Supreme Court justices suggested that they don't think Colorado can legally do what they've done. I thought it was interesting that the justices didn't really even discuss the part about whether or not Trump had engaged in the insurrection, which was a key component to the argument of the Colorado Supreme Court. Instead, they were interested in whether any individual state can legally make that determination. So Bernie, what are your thoughts on this, and do you have a prediction on how the Supreme Court will rule?
Yeah, I do. Here's what I hope and think, that the court will vote either 9-0 against the Supreme Court in the state in which you live, Colorado, or 8-1 at worst. And it's because of what Chief Justice Roberts said. It's a common sense argument he made. He said, if the Colorado decision is allowed to stand and take Donald Trump off the ballot, what would stop other states from doing the same thing? Specifically, what would stop Democratic states from taking Republican presidential candidates off the ballots, and Republican states from taking Democrat presidential candidates off the ballot, and leaving only a few states out of the 50 to decide the presidential election? That's untenable. That can't happen. I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, obviously, but whatever the Constitution says, common sense trumps everything in this case. I mean, I'm an originalist. I'm with the side that wants to read the words of the Constitution. And I hope they find the words in the Constitution to justify what Chief Justice Roberts said, which is, it doesn't make any sense. It leads to chaos. It leads to bad things. And one of those bad things, John, and I'm not trying to be dramatic here, I think if Colorado stands and then Maine's decision to take Trump off the ballot stands, and then other states that legislation is already pending in those states, or court cases are pending to take Donald Trump off the ballot. If that happens, and again, I don't want anybody to think I'm being dramatic for the sake of being dramatic. I think that could lead to a revolution in this country. I mean, we're on the brink right now, and I think that could lead to bad stuff going on in the streets.
So I think I'm with you on, I think it'll be a unanimous decision, or close to unanimous. That's my prediction anyway. As far as the Supreme Court overturning Colorado's decision, I think they will overturn it. Again, I'm saying that based on the oral arguments. As I've said before on this website, I think I said this in response to maybe a Q&A question a few weeks ago, that I wanted to see this play out in court, and I thought I would respect whatever the ruling is. I just was genuinely sort of on the fence about it. But I do think, again, I do think there is a good faith, non-political case even to be made that President Trump in this case, did engage in the insurrection. But I was sort of, I don't know. But that's the 14th Amendment issue. Like I said, which it appears the Supreme Court will be sidestepping, and it's instead focusing on the jurisdiction issue. So I think I'm sort of, I've come to become more interested in sort of the constitutional safeguards. I actually think the Colorado decision, you read what they came up with. I don't think it was just a hack job. I think they actually kind of took it seriously, even though I think these were all Democrats, even the ones that opposed it at the time are Democrats. But yeah, it would be interesting to see where this goes. I guess when you say this can happen anywhere else, I think, that was a very specific thing with the 14th Amendment, where it had to do with an insurrection, had to do with engagement.
No, but what I'm saying, John, it would be the same argument in the other states. It would be
in regard to Trump. Right. Yeah, no, it's an interesting look, because I thought about that at the time. On constitutional grounds, I actually see there is at least a case there. I didn't know exactly how I felt about it, and I still don't know how I feel about it. yeah, with the individual states, that's the element the Supreme Court is focusing on. That's an interesting point to be made, because if one, then it could cause another one. You don't know. Yeah, it's sort of strange. I don't know what the appropriate line of that argument would be. If it's not state by state level, who takes up that argument? Who further examines it? From a 14th Amendment.
Well, you said correctly that they did not take up the central question of impeachment, insurrection.
Insurrection.
Okay, let's use an example between the two of us. You have said repeatedly, and I'm not condemning that, I want to make that clear. You've said repeatedly that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection.
Well, no, I didn't say he's engaged in that. That was the question I had. I believe it was
what happened in insurrection.
Yeah, the actual activity meets a definition any way you look at it of insurrection, but whether or not.
I call it a riot.
Oh, it was a riot too.
I mean, you think those bozos could overthrow the government of the United States? They couldn't overthrow a freaking lemonade stand, So what I'm saying is, one could argue that on the one hand, some people think it's an insurrection. On the other hand, some people say it's a riot. Both are bad, but they're different, certainly from the constitutional point of view. I wish they had taken up the issue and said, well, why is he guilty of engaging in an insurrection? I asked the Colorado lawyer that. Do you have proof of that? Who says that besides you? Who's your friend John Daly? Does he said, I mean, who says it? I know the Constitution says nothing about having to be charged or convicted to be thrown out of, contention for the presidency, to be removed from office rather. But I wish the justices had asked the Colorado lawyer. I'm curious, what official body says it? The January 6th Commission? Not good enough. John Daly? Sorry, not good enough. As smart as he is, not good enough. I mean, I know you didn't say he engaged in it, but you said there was an insurrection.
Right.
I wish the Supreme Court justices had tackled the point that you correctly said they didn't tackle, because I would have loved to hear the arguments made by the lawyer for Colorado. And I think he would have said, by any definition in any dictionary you can find, there was an insurrection, and Donald Trump's speech egged on the insurrectionists. And I would say, well, he egged on a bunch of dopes who rioted. Insurrection? I'm not sure. And since they didn't tackle that issue, we're left with, and they didn't want to tackle that issue. Let's be, that was no accident. They didn't want to get any more into the political argument that they had to. So I think they're going to make the constitutional argument on in the weeds arguments about whether the Constitution talks about the president as an officer. If the president is not included, then it doesn't even apply to him, that portion of the Constitution. I just wish they had taken up the subject that ordinary Americans think about. Did Donald Trump engage in an insurrection? Should he be removed from the Colorado ballot and other ballots because of that? Or did he not? But they didn't do that, and they're not going to. I'm sure they're not going to rule on that, because they didn't ask it questions like that in arguments.
Right, exactly. And that was.
Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I don't think you are wrong. I think they definitely punted on what you and I saw as a key question in all this, and really just were tunnel vision on whether or not a state can actually do this, as opposed, I guess, to, I'm not sure who would otherwise. It'd be a federal thing, I guess, is what they're suggesting. But yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I really would have liked to have heard that argument, because I'm not, like, again, I have said it's an insurrection. It does, to me, it meets every definition of that. But the engagement part, I was not sure about, and I'm still not sure about, because you don't know, is that, I mean, I don't think, I've never made the argument that Donald Trump was orchestrating the riot, you know, that he had planned this. But he, you know, my whole thing with the incitement, I have no problem saying he incited what happened, but I think even on that, we have sort of different, just from reading what you've written on it, I think we have different perspectives. I see him as having incited it through 2 months of lying about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Kind of more focused on that day where he's whipping up the crowd. To me, that's not so much, that wasn't as much of the incitement as it was for 2 months lying about it, inviting everybody to come to January 6th to make their voices heard as this is going on in the Capitol. To me, that was sort of how I view incitement. But
I agree with you.
So
I agree with you, John. Let's end with me asking you for a couple of predictions.
okay.
Will Joe Biden be the nominee at the end of going into November, beyond the convention? Will he be the nominee? And who will win if it's Trump versus Biden 2.0?
Wow. So I think and I've said this all along, I think Biden will be the nominee, unfortunately, for not just for the Democrats, I think, but also the country. I'm of the belief where both parties should be putting their best people forward. And so if their side doesn't win, at least you have someone, you know, who's capable and fit for service.
Right.
I think more likely than not it'll be Biden. I think it would be a good thing. I would celebrate if they put somebody else forward, because I do think both parties should be putting their best people forward. It's tough right now because it's the way I'm not sure with, and I know you're not sure either. But I wrote a column back a while ago. I think I titled it something like, but basically made the case that Biden is, you know, the mentally impaired, Trump is the mentally deranged. You know, when people look at this, they're going to have to make this choice about what they are comfortable going with. If I had to make a prediction today, I still think Biden would win narrowly. I do, and I think it has nothing to do with Biden. He is not helping himself at all. I think the more you listen to Donald Trump, even the more now deranged he's becoming, and he's been deranged for some time. But I think a lot of people really haven't been paying particularly close. Just the public in general isn't really hanging on by Trump's words like they used to be. I think as we hear more, I mean, the other day he was talking about encouraging Russia to basically attack NATO allies if these allies didn't give enough money to NATO, which it's a whole. He's been saying it's just been getting crazier and crazier, and I think a lot of it has sort of fallen under the radar. People just been busy with their lives. They're not paying as close of attention to all the stuff. So, you know, I could definitely be wrong. I mean, you just mentioned you think if it's Biden and Trump, that Trump would probably win. May well be. I just don't know. But it's just, to me, I think people haven't been quite as engaged, and I think part of it has actually helped. Trump hasn't. He's on his little Truth Social thing, which doesn't get nearly the traffic that Twitter did back in the day when he was on that and he was putting out things and more people were seeing it. He's I think become more deranged in his rhetoric, but not as many people are paying attention to it as they were before. So I think maybe, you know, once the campaign really gets going with Biden's camp and they really just throw out all these video clips and all these things that people may have not seen before, they may be reminded. You're going to see all the January 6th stuff as well, of course, but I think they're going to see a lot of stuff they probably haven't been paying attention to so far.
This is the Biden team strategy. Minimize their candidates' mental lapses by keeping him locked up as much as they can, and hope, with good reason, hope that Donald Trump defeats himself by saying one stupid thing after another. And that's why it's going to be closer than I think. By the way, just one thing before we end, because I want to get this out. You know, talking about encouraging Russia to invade a NATO ally is pretty bad. But you know what was worse as far as I was concerned? The same weekend that he said that, he went on, I think it was in South Carolina, but it doesn't matter where he was. It wasn't South Carolina, actually. He said, "Where's Nikki Haley's husband? Where is he?" Well, you know where he was? He was in Africa serving in the South Carolina National Guard. He was on duty, deployed as a soldier. Damn it, that's where he was, Donald Trump. And by the way, since you're asking that question, where's Melania? She hasn't been on the campaign trail with you even once during this campaign. How freaking stupid is that, man? And this is when they sit around behind closed doors in the Biden camp. They're saying, we got to keep Joe Biden out of the public eye, because if they see too much of him, they're not going to vote for him. Because Donald Trump at the same time will say one stupid thing after another, and the support he has from independents will go down, will dissipate, and will win. And you know what? They may be right, but if the election were held today, after we've seen Joe Biden the past few days looking pretty bad, then I think Donald Trump would win. But there's a long time between now and November, and Donald Trump has plenty of time to lose this election. Joe Biden won't win the election. Donald Trump could lose it, though.
Yeah, I always see it too. Nobody's going to win it. It's only going to be lost, regardless.
All right. Good seeing you again, John. I hope my final word to our patrons, our subscribers, our friends, tell more of your friends.
Absolutely,
as many people listening to this as possible, because that increases our influence and your influence. So get a subscription for a friend, tell a friend to sign up. And as I've said before, if you have liberal friends who you think won't like what we have to say, they'll like John, not me so much. But if you have liberal friends who you think won't like what I have to say, give them a subscription just to drive them nuts. That'll be fun.
That's right. And just to clarify, everybody loves me, Bernie. It's not just the liberal side, but
I know not so much
your subscribers, but most other people. But yeah, just everything Bernie said, everybody, and always leave your comments. Let us know if you have questions for the Friday Q&As. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about here on the No BS Zone. Bernie, you have a great day. All right.
You too, John. Bye-bye.
Thank you.